Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on the Brink at this very distressing time. We weren't planning to go live now, but we are in response to the awful news from Manchester, where there's been a suspected terror attack, 4 people injured, stabbing, car ramming, and the suspects killed. Andrew, what are your thoughts so far?
Well, we haven't had any official confirmation as to what the cause of this was, but I think we can have a bold guess at this point. It's astonishing. I've always found it astonishing when speaking at synagogues, when I've given events there, to see the amount of security that synagogues in the UK have long needed, just to go about their usual daily or weekly worship. And from the sound of things, the attacker didn't get anywhere near inside, which means I think the CST must have done their job incredibly well. So, incredibly distressing. Thoughts are, of course, with the victims and their families. And, this is a result of the toxic atmosphere. If it is the motive that we assume it is, it's the toxic atmosphere that's been created by this 2-year propaganda storm that has been absolutely directed against Jews in the diaspora.
Yeah, I mean, the security side of things is a big one. I've got a lot of personal experience of this because I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish environment, going to a Jewish school, synagogues, bakeries, etc., etc. And even then, before the turn of the millennium, we had a lot of security. Not only do we have a lot of security, but we had reason for it. I mean, we had regular bomb scares at my school, which would require us to evacuate to a nearby old age home. That was our kind of safe place to go. We had thugs turning up to cause trouble on more than one occasion. I can remember being frog marched out. My physics teacher was a former cop who I remember grabbing these 2 guys and hauling them out of the school who'd come to cause trouble. And this was something that we lived with growing up. This was again years ago in the 90s, and things, of course, have only got worse and worse ever since. You mentioned the CST. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is? People might not know what that is.
Yes, the CST, I think it's Community Security Trust, I believe is what it stands
Yeah.
for. They are volunteers. They are trained to do kind of security at these events. And they're basically the first line of defense for synagogues and other Jewish institutions in the UK. And they get a pretty good level of training. I've got friends who've served with the CST, and they're sort of all Krav Maga'd up and able to look after themselves. But yeah, it's clearly a job that's going to be even more demanding in this current environment. And I'm hoping that everyone that was injured is okay.
I mean, it's interesting that the CST, when I was editor of the Jewish Chronicle, I went to see their operations room. And it's really impressive. They're not just a kind of local bouncer group or a vigilante group. They receive government funding and work very closely with the police. So they've got an operations room with extensive CCTV from all different areas around London. There's a seat in the operations room which a police officer will take as the liaison officer during. So now there would be somebody there, for example, from the police during high holy days, during periods of extra heightened tension. And so those guys, if you look at the pictures from Manchester today, you'll see people with CST blue vests and caps. So they're not police, but they work with the police, and they're funded by the government as well as charity as well. And that just shows how seriously this stuff needs to be taken. And it's annoying, going to a Jewish event, having to go through security, show your bag, all the rest of it. But this just goes to show how necessary this is. I mean, in your experience of a security experience, Andrew, what do you think's going on now as we speak in terms of dealing with this?
Yeah, so the police response, let's talk about that. The incident response with firearms teams, they have a matrix of firearms teams where they can reach pretty much anywhere in any city in a certain amount of time. And that's how the police are always able to respond so quickly with firearms teams to these kinds of events. The next thing the police will do is call Plato, which is the national response to a marauding terror attack. And that essentially puts everyone in the country on higher alert. just in case this isn't a lone wolf and it's, a slightly more organized kind of 7th of July terror attack kind of thing. So the police will be on higher standby. Special forces will be called forward. UKSF has very, very high readiness counter-terrorism units, good to go at any minute of the day. They've got helicopters, fast cars, ready to get to where they need to be. And then, of course, the police investigation will kick in. Now, in Manchester, the Manchester bombing, which, of course, you know intimately, having been on the ground, um, they will normally do quite high risk raids on the houses of people who participate in these attacks. Uh, they will seize electronic equipment, phones, laptops, and they'll try and work out motive and if this is part of something bigger or if it's just a one-off, lone attacker. So there's a whole very well rehearsed UK counter-terrorism plan in place that will have multiple agencies involved, and that will be spinning into gear as we speak.
And of course, there's been reports of sightings of a explosive vest which have been unconfirmed, but we do understand that there is some bomb disposal investigation taking place at the scene. I mean, how will that fit in to the overall police operation, do you think?
So I've got some experience of this, having run it in Northern Ireland for the army, and it's a Royal Logistic Corps unit that will go forward. They do the bomb disposal. They're called ATOs, Ammunition Technical Officers, and they're the same guys that were defusing IEDs in the ground for us in Afghanistan. It's a really long course that these guys go on. They're absolute ninjas at the old red wire, blue wire thing you see from films. They're the experts at doing that in their bomb suits, or they'll deploy the robot forward. They call it the wheelbarrow. It looks like a little tracked robot, and that can go forward and use things like high water pressure to diffuse the bombs. So all of that will be kicking into gear as well. Obviously, if it is an explosive threat, there'll be cordons, there'll be people pushed back certain distances to make sure they're out of any blast range while the ATOs do their work. So all of this stuff is very well rehearsed, very well practiced, and our security forces absolutely know what they're doing.
And are you saying this will be a military unit rather than a police unit?
Yeah, military bomb disposal is what we use in the UK.
Okay, that's interesting. And so the interface between the police and the army will presumably be a kind of rehearsed procedure of its own.
Yeah, so the police will be in overall control of the site. You'll have something called a silver commander, who is the police kind of operational commander. Uh, you'll have bronze commanders on the ground controlling various cordons and that sort of things. And the bottom line is this is rehearsed, it's practiced. There's to be a counter-terrorism incident commander, there's a course that police officers have to go on that teaches them how to run these multi-agency operations. And so if they know they need an ATO or a bomb disposal, then there'll be a book for that. They'll just open the pamphlet and it'll tell them everything they have to do to get the cordon set in properly and the ATO on scene and doing their job until the bomb's diffused, if there is a bomb, of course.
Yeah, I mean the part of the procedure, as it were. I mean, unfortunately, these attacks have become procedures because they've happened so frequently in Britain and around Europe and elsewhere. They've become a procedure, and the part that I'm familiar with is as a journalist because when I became a foreign reporter for the Mail, the second story that I covered was the Bataclan attack on the ground, and that really marked the beginning of covering every terror attack in Europe during that period. So I covered the attacks in Nice and Stockholm and Berlin and Brussels and even further afield in Istanbul and the Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. So I've been through the grim procedure on many, many occasions. And it always follows a certain pattern. So there's the first part is just the panic. You fly somewhere, get on the ground, go straight to the scene and just see who's there. And often you'll find that people who've been there at the attack will have gone away and a few hours later often come back to kind of get their heads around what just happened. Was that real? Like, we just go back there. So as a journalist, you'd often find shell shocked witnesses sort of stumbling back almost just to kind of get their heads around it. And I spoke to a lot of people in that sort of state at the Bataclan onwards. You'll have the shrines which will develop outside, and in a way, I always used to measure the advance of the process by how big the shrine was when I first arrived compared to how it was a few hours later. It just grows and grows and grows. I remember in the Bataclan attack, there was bullet holes in the glass that people threaded roses through. So then the first period is really looking at the finding out the victims, who they were, what happened to them, speaking to relatives, knocking on doors. The old death knock, as it's called in the trade, is a really unpleasant part of the job, which, to be honest, sometimes I would pretend to have done and not do if it just felt morally wrong to me. But on a lot of occasions, knocking the door and trying to speak to the family is part of it, witnesses. And then the circus moves on, if I can call it that. Forgive my language, but I don't mean to underestimate the severity of it. But the whole thing moves on to the manhunt. And that usually then the news moves on to that. Lots of police raids, trying to identify people, suspects, and then there'll be, raids and explosions and things like that around the country that you're scrambled to. And all of this, I mean, in my experience, the victims are right at the front of the story in the beginning, as they should be right now. And then after, as the moments pass, as the days pass and the weeks pass, they fade a little bit, and it becomes all about the perpetrator. And in a way, I kind of feel like there are these two poles of the story, and what we really need to be focusing on, of course, it's the victims, but the perpetrators. I mean, if we can just look at this from a political point of view, again, we should point out that we don't know who the perpetrator is or perpetrators are at this point. We don't know that they're jihadis. We don't know, they could be could be anybody. Yeah. But just taking a step back, almost all the terror attacks that we're talking about have been perpetrated by jihadis with a jihadi motivation from one way or another. And it just focuses minds on the seriousness of our security and immigration policy in Britain. I think everyone's going to naturally be thinking about that, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's like I say, it's far too soon to speculate on this stuff, and it could be like an Axel Ruddy Buchanan, where he's a homegrown, effectively. It could be a white nationalist. We just don't know at this stage, and the speculation is inevitably going to point in one direction. And I may have fallen into that trap right at the start of the conversation, but everyone will be grasping for information at this point and drawing early conclusions. And I think a really good lesson from Southport is the need to just wait for information, as much as it goes against every instinct we have, until we have the facts. It's a little bit irresponsible to speculate.
That's right, but I do feel at the same time, though, there's a discussion which has been had for quite a long time, and which is relevant today, or may be relevant today, about the level of threat that we face. There are tens of thousands. I think the latest figure was more than 40,000 people being watched or on the list for as potential threats. The majority of them are jihadis. I remember when the William Shawcross review of the Prevent counter-terror strategy came out a few years ago. Sir William was actually at my book launch this week, and he was made no bones about pointing out that the centre of gravity of the terror threat in Britain, is a jihadi threat.
Absolutely.
So the vast majority of the plots that have been foiled, and the threat comes from that. And yet his report was immediately attacked from the left as being Islamophobic. And he told me, actually, I don't think he'd mind me saying, that when Labour came in, he offered his assistance as the counter-terror expert who's reviewed our Prevent strategy to Labour. And they just totally didn't even respond to him, because he'd been smeared as Islamophobic, even though he absolutely is not. He's just being realistic about the threats that we face.
Well, Henry Jackson Society get that as well. They've pushed out a lot of stuff about Islamic extremism. And every time I post a report, I'm accused of being Islamophobic because I work for HJS. It's this classic leftist technique of shutting down debate by calling it a name, and alleging bigotry. Look at what Labour did this week. Look at how waving a UK flag means you're worse than racist, I believe was the word that Shabana Mahmood came out with, worse than racist. And we all know that racist is the absolute worst insult that a lefty can throw at you. And this is worse than that, just for waving a flag. So, this is the atmosphere, unfortunately, that these politics have created.
But it's funny, isn't it? Because at the Labour conference, we were talking about this just the other day. Sea of union flags this time round, but totally disingenuous. I mean, because this is the party that not only recognised Palestine, but also has been accusing anybody who's talking about the jihadi threat in Britain as being Islamophobic. So the way they're using this sort of window dressing of the union flag, even George Cross's, was just obscene to my mind. Um,
Well,
but
look, we've even got it in the comments right now. This buffoon Peggy Toomey is saying that we're Zionist apologists and genocide deniers and typical racist ex-military. Well, thank you for that, Peggy. I think it's probably worth pointing out that I helped rescue 3,000 Islamic Afghans from Afghanistan, who are still some of my dear friends. And that was after their countrymen tried to kill me repeatedly. So, Islamophobia, I think I'm more than in the clear for that. And unfortunately, you are spreading the kind of toxic filth that leads to attacks like this because you're repeating Hamas lies. You have been conned by a 2-year propaganda campaign that is directly affecting Jews in the UK. So you, frankly, are part of the problem, and you sicken me, Peggy. So I hope that makes it very clear that I respond to your filth and abuse in that manner. So thank you very much for stopping by, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
In fact, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it is coming up to the second anniversary of October the 7th, which in itself, is a major moment for self-reflection. Of course, the anguish that Jews are going through, speaks for itself. I mean, I wrote a piece for The Spectator this week about it, and I found myself writing that, October the 7th, second year, we don't need your tears. We've got enough of our own to be dealing with, and the people who would cry with us have already done so, and those who wouldn't never will, and they deserve only our defiance, nothing else. And I feel like there's a real sense this time round, after 2 years, yes, we've got the heartbreak and the anguish of it, but just the defiance is even more prominent, certainly in my emotions and a lot of people that I know, because as you just said, we've had 2 years of propaganda encouraging this hatred, this propaganda that's been produced by Hamas, amplified shamelessly and willfully by the media, amplified by NGOs, by the UN, has influenced government policy and has changed how people feel about Jews and about Israel all across the Western world and indeed further afield. And it's only going to be a matter of time until these sorts of, again, I don't want to speculate about the motivation or the identity of the perpetrator, but it's only a matter of time before people begin to carry out more and more acts of violence. We've seen a pattern from, last year. Anti-Semitic rape of a 12-year-old girl in Paris was just one example that stood out, that made the news, that everyone's forgotten about. There've been countless, there've been killings in America and elsewhere. The shooting of the diplomats, the chap early on who was killed by being hit with a megaphone. The firebombing of the vigil for the hostages, including a Holocaust survivor just a few months ago. This stuff keeps happening, and a big part of the reason for that is the propaganda produced by Hamas, amplified by the UN, the media, and taken on by Keir Starmer and our leaders across Europe, who are recognizing a Palestinian state, just encouraging this sort of stuff, blaming Israel as the ghouls in all this, when actually it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's it. And, this is all coming from Hamas, and that's what people seem to forget. It's the single point of truth or point of information. That they're,
Yeah.
Yeah, the point of untruth. Perfectly put. I can tell you're a writer. The But yeah, they're taking stuff that Hamas tell them, amplifying it around the world, and then NGOs are just repeating. It's circular reporting. They're all repeating the same stuff, and it all comes from Hamas, every bit of it. And what we've got effectively is a 2025 evolution of the blood libel that has been going on for centuries, if not millennia, at this point. Where it's not Israel, it's the Jews. It's the Jews that they're blaming. And let's not disambiguate between, I'm just an anti-Zionist. We all know what that means. It means you're against the Jewish homeland. Nathan's made a really great point in the comments that it's coming from us and echoed in Westminster by our disgusting government. And you're right, it is. The Labour Party voting on these ludicrous genocide allegations. But it's all coming from a very, very complex and well-organised Hamas campaign, backed up by their people in positions of power in these institutions.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely a blood libel against the Jews, and there's no getting around that.
And it's really interesting because I think that we need to be clearer and more specific about analyzing how the problem of Hamas is not just Israel's problem.
Mm,
I mean, just yesterday there was a report about German security forces foiling a Hamas plot to kill Jews in Germany. They had to make A-47s and some other
mm,
weapons. And Hamas, of course, are a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood being the wellspring of all jihadi groups, really. They all trace their lineage back to that organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is banned across the Middle East by UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, where it started, and elsewhere. And it's responded to those bans by moving its center of operations to the West, and in particular Britain. The Muslim Brotherhood operates here, thrives here, has been here for many, many decades. In 2015, as I say in my book, a report by Charles Farr and John Jenkins, two security officials, a secret report, some of it was made public for the government, um, identified the Muslim Brotherhood as a national security threat here in Britain. 2015, that's 10 years ago. Nothing has been done. Farage is the only politician who's pledged to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, and I hope that he gets in just for that reason, because it's so important. So we've got this jihadi network here. They progress, as you said in our last broadcast, I think, progress by increments over a
mm,
generational basis, trying to influence the country, the government, to influence, to create Sharia law eventually, and will resort to violence if necessary. This is a very insidious organization that's in the grip, that holds Muslim communities in Britain in its grip. And it's functioning alive and well in Britain, and it's part of the propaganda campaign. I just wonder, I
mm,
don't know what you think about this, but it feels to me as if one of the effects of the pro-Hamas propaganda is to make people more sympathetic to Muslims, regardless of their ideology. It's like, okay, Hamas, you get the pattern of putting aside Hamas's jihadism because you're sympathetic for them because you hate Israel so much. And that could be extended towards because people become less critical of Muslims, open their heart, you know, all Muslims, jihadi or not, you've got our sympathy because we all hate Israel. And I think that makes us less guarded against jihadis coming into our country or operating, and less sympathetic when attacks like this happen as well.
well, it potentially takes on a it's a kind of leftist mindset, that, because I think coming from a sort of more centre right perspective, I just tend to take people as people and then get called racist for doing that as well. Um, and I've got no issue with someone being a Muslim in the UK. It doesn't, if they're a good tax-paying, law-abiding citizen who contributes to society, then great, I'm fine with that. But it's these organisations that really are the worst, the worst kind of people, that amplify this kind of toxic ideology of Islamism, which is very different to Islam. Um, and I know I have heard on the rumour mill that prior to Rishi bouncing people with the general election last year, they were actually set to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, but it never quite got onto onto the legislation books. So the extremism is always the problem, and that's what we have to fight against.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's a difficult thing to talk about because extremism is so endemic in so much of our Muslim communities in Britain and elsewhere. In
Mm.
fact, Henry Jackson Society research showed some appalling. You probably remember
Yeah,
those figures. What was it? 1 in 4.
yeah.
Uh, I forget exactly what it was.
Yeah, I think it was 1 in 4 were sympathetic to Hamas, I think was the figure that came out. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, was it that, or was it anyway? There was
I need to go. I need to go and check. Yeah, it wasn't my report.
Yeah, it was like widespread sympathy for Hamas in Muslim communities in Britain. That's not to say that there aren't decent Muslims who don't support Hamas. Of course there are, and they're the ones that we need to support and embrace. And banning the Muslim Brotherhood will take those clutches off those communities, allowing people to express their views, their pro-Western views, even pro-Israel views, without fear of retaliation. So all of this is part of the wider picture that this current terror attack in Manchester appears to fit into, although we don't know, again, who the perpetrator is. But the other thing that really bothers me is I haven't checked on Twitter, God help me, but there'll
Oh,
be a
mate.
lot of people who will be looking at this attack and thinking they had it coming.
Yeah, about time. Yeah, that's what they'll be thinking, and that will, of course, be heavily amplified by the bot farms that are out there that have done such a, I don't know what the word is. It's kind of remarkable job of boosting the propaganda that Peggy is still spewing all over the comments. Um, and this is a real existential battle in some ways, because it's what I've called the unenlightenment, the death of epistemology, because we've lost the ability to critically think and do source analysis and look at how what evidence you've got to support what's being pushed out there, and stop and think and actually listen to people who know what they're talking about, rather than just go to some rando user with an anonymous username on Twitter for your information. We're in a real, societally, I think we're in a real problem with these bot farms, and the way it's so easy to push this propaganda, be it Hamas's, be it Russia's over Ukraine, um, be it anything else. So it's societally, I think that's something we need to deal with, and it can only really happen at government level. But there's no impetus or kind of desire to do so.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Jewish community at the heart of all this. Up in Manchester, Orthodox community. I've got a feeling I was there quite recently for an event, but I may be misremembering. But certainly, it's a community that I know well. But it's interesting, Jews. I mean, you spend as much time with Jews as I do these days, and there is a sense, isn't there, in Britain, in the Jewish community, that's increasingly isolated and different to the mainstream because of the increased level of threat.
Yeah, absolutely. I speak to my Jewish friends, and I'm an honorary member of the tribe, I'm told. So I embrace that with great pride. They tell me that they're starting to think if there's even a home left for them in the UK at this point. That they're genuinely thinking about having to leave this country because of the toxic atmosphere that's been created, and that sickens and appalls me. Every time they say it to me, it breaks my heart, because you know this is supposed to be a country where we guarantee the security and safety of our citizens. And yet, because of the way this debate has been internationalized, because of the way Hamas propaganda has been able to permeate the brains of so many people, we're creating an atmosphere where there's a group of people who've done nothing, who feel unsafe, unwelcome, and unable to stay here. So it's going to be one of the great tragedies of our time if this comes to fruition and people do start leaving and heading to Israel. Incredibly, incredibly sad state of affairs.
And it does feel, I mean, it does feel like for Jews, even more powerfully than everyone else, it feels like we're on the brink, so to speak. Jews have been feeling very, very anxious and concerned since before October the 7th, and certainly since October the 7th. I mean, take a step back, and it's still remarkable that the world's response to October the 7th was to hate Israel more rather than to hate jihadism more. Go figure about that one.
Yeah,
But
something, I went to speak. So I've done lots of speaking engagements in the last 2 years with the Jewish community. The one that absolutely stuck in my mind was the Holocaust Survivors Charity in London, where I had the honour of talking to these people who survived that horror. Uh, and I came away chilled, because they told me it was like the atmosphere was like Germany in the 1930s with the propaganda against the Jewish population. And it's all very well, someone like Gary Lineker saying it's always just like the Nazis, but these people were there. They lived through it. They experienced what it's like to have the state to try and exterminate your entire race. And they're saying that it reminds them of then, which is chilling. I mean, there's no other word for it. It's horrifying. Um, and yeah, we're seeing it. We're seeing it day after day after day on social media. The steady drumbeat of blood libels against Jews, starting with the nonsensical genocide claims that have been going on for 30 or 40 years, never mind since October the 7th. And inside that, you can unpack all the old traditional blood libels, killing children, yada, yada, yada. Like, that's what war looks like in any other part of the world. In Israel, all of a sudden, it's the Jews doing something even worse. And it's just this hideous inversion of reality.
yeah,
What a situation we've got ourselves into.
and of course,
Really?
the
Yeah.
the attack today in Manchester is only going to reinforce the feelings of a lot of people that their future might not lie here. I mean, my mum, for
Mm.
example, Orthodox Jewish, lives in an Orthodox Jewish community. she hasn't got that many friends around anymore because they've all left to go to Israel. She
Mm.
goes and does the activities that she used to do with friends, but hasn't got anyone to go with. There was one show she wanted to go to, but her friends had gone to Israel, so she didn't have anyone to go to. So she had to ask my brother or whatever. So that is happening. um, and but the one big difference between now and the 1930s is the state of Israel, that Jews have got somewhere to go. And
Mm.
if ever you wanted confirmation of the reason that Israel is necessary, it's this here now. People are blaming Israel for this attack and others. The rise of antisemitism is nothing to do with Israel. Israel's just an excuse. As I
Mm.
put in my book last in 2023, is Israelophobia. It's just the latest. I mean, Israel wasn't around when the Holocaust was committed. Don't tell me Israel's the problem. Israel wasn't around when the Spanish Inquisition happened, or when the pogroms happened across Eastern Europe, or even when anti-Semitism has taken place throughout the Middle East over the generations. Israel is not the problem. Israel is the way to protect ourselves against this sort of stuff. And after October the 7th, even until today, every now and again, I have a conversation with an Israeli where I say, "How are you holding up?" And they say, "No, no, no. How are you doing?"
Mm.
Because Israelis feel that they're okay. They know who they are. They know what they're fighting. And we in the West know neither of those things anymore. And the Jews feel vulnerable because of that. And, I just wonder whether, Jews, I was speaking to my book launch again a few days ago, Julia Hartley Brewer, the talk TV journalist who's just come back from Israel. And she was talking about how someone she did a podcast with had spent the night in a bomb shelter with their 1-year-old child. Um, and rather than making me feel afraid, it made me feel inspired,
Mm.
because Israelis know that they can do that and get up and carry on living, working, looking after their kids, loving, getting married, having a family, expressing themselves. They know what it means to be alive and to fight for that and to defend yourself. And I think that is a big difference between the Holocaust and now. And ironically, that's what the rest of the West needs to get back, that we've lost. A lot of,
Mm.
finger wagging it to Israel, but Israel's got what we are suffering because we've let go of it. Don't you think?
Yeah, and it's there's that passivity that we're just accepting this happening to our society. Nobody's getting a grip of it. Nobody is doing anything. We're just sitting back and watching it happen as our societies fall apart. And it goes back to my earlier point. I think we don't understand the fight we're in right now. I think nobody in government or making policy is understands where we are. We're carrying on as if everything was just fine. Even down to our defense policy with um, with Ukraine. It's not even necessarily just a kind of
Yeah.
domestic problem. We're watching Russia stick probes in across all kinds of eastern flank countries, and we're going, yeah, cool. Well, we're still going to build this tank in 5 years' time. By 2030, we'll have some drones. It's like, no, we're in real trouble here.
Yeah.
We're at 2 seconds to midnight, and we're just sliding it. I mean, it's sliding into sight, and we're just looking at it and going, oh, look at that.
In fact, that's a really interesting example, because when the Ukraine war happened, our main response, it seemed to me, I mean, of course, Boris did lead a big effort to arm Ukraine and support Ukraine, and that was wonderful and very valuable. But partly because of Biden, we weren't willing to give them what they needed to finish the job, to actually win, just to keep in the game. But our main response culturally was to pull up loads of flags. You
Yeah.
know, this flag thing again. Flags. I mean, in my book, I was writing about the need to restore the flags to public life. But now it's since the Labour conference, and thinking about our response to Ukraine with all the flags don't necessarily mean what they should mean anymore. In the hands of Labour, flags mean something else. It means, vote for us. We're going to pretend to be patriotic.
It means oranges at half time, apparently.
It means oranges at half time. The flag doesn't mean. I mean, that's one of the things that make.
The
Okay, I
quiet
can't
knock on
even.
the door to check your neighbour's okay. I mean, it's just so asinine. Everything he
Exactly.
said came out of his mouth was asinine. Someone's asked a question, what can we do as mere citizens about this? And it's a great question. You do answer it in your book. So I'll give you the opportunity to expand on the things you've written there, because I think that there are good answers. Because I was a little bit rudderless in answering that until I read the mighty Never Again. So I'll let you go for it.
Okay. Well, we've strayed a little bit from our brief of talking about the terror attack, but it's all very relevant culturally, and we'll come back
Mm.
to it in a moment, perhaps, and then conclude. But yeah, I mean, the book I've got it here, and at the end of it, there's a section on the science of social change. So I talk about the first part is really looking at the problem, which is centrist radicalism, centrist
Mm.
fundamentalism. The sort of all the parties are the same. Don't be proud of your country, don't respect your borders, don't respect your traditions, opening the door to Islamist radicals, to progressive radicals, and to white supremacists, certainly in America and Europe, taking up that oxygen that we'd left and trying to define us over our heads. But the solution, I think, is looking at the science of social change and how you can create a cascade in society where, for example, people stop thinking that segregation is okay in America and start to think that segregation is not okay. All the social movements that led to Brexit or led to the election of Trump. I mean, these things are not clear-cut virtues, but I'm saying that societies can change, can change.
Mm.
And I think the way of doing that is by um, something which I call change entrepreneurs. There's an academic called Cass Sunstein who was involved in the development of the nudge theory, who's big on this
Mm.
idea. So the individuals who can say what people are too afraid to say, for example, Israel is good, and you can say it loudly without worrying about the consequences, and you can try to persuade other people that that's the case. Jihadism is bad, Israel is good on the most basic level. Those people who are willing to stand up and persuade others can blaze a trail for less courageous people to begin to feel it's okay that I can stand up and say the same thing now. And there are other people who didn't even know they agreed will suddenly think, you know what, I actually agree with you. And the more people there are, the more persuasion can be brought to bear upon people who hadn't made their minds up one way or the other, and you can effect a social change with the more people who stand up like that, the more chance there is of our society turning around. And I think that time is ripe for that now. As Labour co-opting the flag, and what's the word they use? Appropriating our own flag for progressive
Labour's
against
cultural
us.
appropriation. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, that just shows they know which way the wind is blowing. It's blowing in our favor, and it's blowing, people might not realize it, it's blowing in the favor of Israel and democracy and the West. And we need to start to harness that and stand up for it and try to effect that change. And hopefully we'll see fewer of these appalling attacks like we saw just today in Manchester on Yom Kippur.
So mobilise the silent majority is what you're saying.
That's basically it. Yeah, and if it's a silent minority, make it less silent. You'll soon find yourself in
Speak
the
up.
majority.
Speak up. Just if enough of us raise our voices, that'll create a crowd. And once you have a crowd, you can make yourself heard. And I think that's the way to do it.
Okay, we've just had news just in that 2 people have lost their lives tragically
That's sad.
in a Manchester attack. Um, So yeah, a sobering reminder of the gravity of the fight that we're now in. And I can only say that, I mean, obviously I know many people in the Jewish community from Manchester and elsewhere. This tragedy is, Jews still feel the agony of each other, even if they haven't met them. As Christians seem to have lost that, they don't seem to care about the plight of Christians in Nigeria or elsewhere, but Jews feel that. And those 2 deaths will really strike a chill into the heart of every Jewish person and every right-thinking person, frankly,
Mm.
around the world. And I just think that, there'll be some Jews who are just terrified now,
Mm.
um,
And understandably so, and
and
rightly so.
understandably so. In fact, every Jew, I think, will feel that way. But then there's also going to be a whole lot of defiance and a sort of embrace of that Israeli spirit of we've been through thousands of years of this stuff. This is more of it. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't have happened. We should be protected here. But if you're not going to protect us, we're going to have to protect ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And this is the time for for those of us who do stand with the Jewish community to do it vocally and to do it in public, because private expressions of solidarity are no use at times like these. And it's never an easy thing to do. You're putting yourself in the firing line. I mean, just go and look at my Twitter replies. I don't look at them anymore because the relentless abuse is there, and it's for standing up for Jews, and that's what does it. But we need people to stand up. Nothing's ever going to change if you don't raise your voice and show the Jewish community that you stand with them in whichever country you're in.
Exactly, and I mean, just as perhaps a final idea, it's very likely. Again, we should say we've said this throughout, that we don't know who the perpetrator is, don't know his or her motivations or anything. But it's very likely, if it's anything like other terror attacks, that this person thought they were the good guy.
Yeah.
The Nazis thought they were the good guys. The terrorists think that they're doing the will of God. They're doing a good thing. And all I can say is that the propaganda that you've been talking about, that we've been talking about, that's influenced hearts and minds so appallingly over the last 2 years, has made a whole lot of people think that they're the good guys, and think that Hamas are the good guys, and think that jihadis are the good guys. And it's turned people upside down. And that's what we have to fight against. It might not be another terror attack. It might be vandalism. It might be abuse. It might be an insult. It might be not picking up the phone. It might be, not coming to my book launch, as some former friends of mine did because they were so offended about Israel. It might be that. But whatever it is, as you say, we got to stand up and stand against it and make clear that no, good is good and bad is bad. And for all the nuance, we need to be clear about that and assert it before it's too late.
Yeah, and I don't think I can add to that. Every word.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in on this dark day. It's not how I intended to spend my Yom Kippur, I can tell you that. This will be online soon to watch again. We've got some further episodes coming up with Yossi Cohen from the Mossad, Yoav Gallant. We're not sure what this will do to our scheduling, but it's all coming your way very soon. Thank you for joining us. I hope you feel that you're among friends, and we're all in this together. So,
yeah. Final words, thoughts with the families of those affected in Manchester, solidarity with the Jewish community. And that's the final thought to leave you on. Stand up, make your voice heard.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
You've been listening to the Brink's Rapid Response to the News on Substack Live. For further episodes, sign up today at thebrinkpodcast.co.uk.